The air inside the tavern known as Zumsfarzenferkel, the Black Piglet, is thick enough to chew. It is Berlin, late 1893. The room smells of stale tobacco, spilled Pilsner, and the distinct copper tang of nervous sweat. In the corner, a man sits at a battered upright piano. He is gaunt, his hair a wild shock of straw, his eyes burning with a fever that has nothing to do with influenza. This is Stanislav Przeveshsky. They call him the Sad Satan. He isn't summoning demons with a grimoire. He isn't sacrificing a goat. He's playing Chopin, but he is playing it wrong. He hammers the keys with such violent, ecstatic intensity that the melody dissolves into a wall of sound. The patrons, a mix of poets, painters, and drifters, stop drinking. They stare. They feel it, a vibration in the floorboards, a hum in the chest. It feels like danger. It feels like arousal. It feels like the air before a lightning strike. Tonight, we are peeling back the curtain on one of the most misunderstood chapters of the 20th century. We're looking at the so-called Satanism of pre-war Germany. But if you are expecting devil worship and brimstone, you are looking in the wrong place. We're going to explore a different reality, a reality built on energy, specifically a misunderstood primal current that historians call occultism, but which the practitioners knew simply as the mechanics of the human body. We need to talk about the color black. Not the color of evil, but the color of the void, the color of the soil, the color of the womb. The rumors that swirled around men like Przebesky and later Hans Heinz Evers were fueled by a public that sensed a dark current but couldn't name it. To the uninitiated, this energy felt like a threat. It triggered a primal fear. But to the adepts in that smoke-filled room in Berlin, this black current was nothing more and nothing less than the raw voltage of sexual energy. Let's stay in that tavern for a moment. Watch Przebesky's hands. He was obsessed with the idea that the soul was a tyrant and that true liberation lay in the flesh. He wrote a book called The Synagogue of Satan, but it wasn't a manual for worshiping Lucifer. It was a manifesto of biology. The central thesis of this bohemian underground was that sexual energy, the literal, physical sensation of desire, was the base matter of the universe. They believed that if you could strip away the guilt, the societal shame, and the religious dogma, you would be left with a pure black etheric substance. Imagine this energy like a heavy, viscous oil. It is the lowest etheric energy, sitting just above the physical world. It is dense, it is potent, and most importantly, it is sticky. It clings to the aura. When a person immerses themselves in what the text calls black magical energy, which is simply the focused retention and manipulation of sexual force, they change. Their presence becomes heavy. When a normal, God-fearing citizen walked into the Black Piglet and stood near Przebesky, they didn't see a man. They felt a pressure. Their own internal alarms went off. This is where the misunderstanding begins. The human nervous system is wired to interpret the unknown as a threat. When you encounter someone vibrating with this intense, accumulated biological power, your body responds with the next energy level up the ladder. Red, the energy of fear, the energy of war. So, the poet sits there practically glowing with this dark, fertile energy of creation, and the public looks at him and sees a monster. They project their own fear onto him. They call him a Satanist because Satan is the only word they have for a power that terrifyingly raw. But the tragedy and the danger lies in how this energy was harvested. The method was an open secret in the occult circles of Berlin and Munich. It wasn't about chanting. It was about physiology. The goal was to build a body out of this energy, a non-physical vehicle that could survive death and manipulate reality. To do this, one had to generate massive amounts of bioelectricity. The technique described in the esoteric circles was specific: the prolongation of the sexual act, denying the release, forcing the pre-orgasm energy to flood back into the nervous system, saturating the cells over and over again, day after day, year after year. It sounds mechanical, almost clinical, and for many it was, but it was also dangerous. The human psyche is fragile. When you dam up a river, the pressure builds. If the vessel isn't strong enough, the dam breaks. In the sleep of these practitioners, the energy would discharge violently. Dreams became hallucinations. Inner demons, the suppressed traumas and neuroses, were fed by this high-octane fuel and roared to life. Men like Przybylski walked a razor's edge between enlightenment and total mental collapse. And there was a disparity here, a distinct asymmetry between the sexes. In these circles, women were often seen as naturally adept at this. The female physiology, with its capacity for multiple orgasms and sustained plateaus of pleasure, was viewed as a natural generator of this black etheric substance. This is why, throughout history, and certainly in the witch trials that scarred the German landscape centuries prior, women were feared. A woman standing in her power, radiating this black magnetic energy, terrified the church fathers. They saw the black aura and screamed, "Witch!" They saw the biological power of attraction and called it a demonic attack. But for the men of the pre-war era, this was work, hard, grueling discipline. They turned to Tantra not as a spiritual path, but as a technology. They were trying to hack the human operating system. And this pursuit of the black body led them into the shadows. Now shift the scene. The year is 1913. We move south to Munich, the neighborhood of Schwabing. This is the home of the cosmic circle. If Berlin was the black energy of sex, Munich was beginning to glow with the red energy of blood. Enter Alfred Schuler. Schuler is a different kind of magician. He is obsessed with the blood beacon. He holds court in salons, arguing that the life force of the ancestors is carried in the blood and that by tapping into it, one can revitalize the German spirit. Do you see the shift? We are moving from the personal, biological work of the individual, the black energy, to the collective, martial energy of the tribe, the red energy. Red energy sits above black. It is the frequency of the warrior. It is the vibration of survival, conflict, and heroism. But it is also the vibration of fear. When the First World War shattered Europe, the delicate experiments of the Berlin Bohemians were crushed under the treads of tanks. The world didn't want to make love anymore. It wanted to survive. The trenches of the Great War were a massive ritual of red energy. Millions of men, terrified, flooded with adrenaline, facing death daily. The psychic atmosphere of Germany changed. The heavy, sensual black current was overlaid with the sharp, metallic tang of blood and iron. And when the war ended, and the soldiers came home to a broken country, the two energies began to mix in a toxic alchemy. This brings us to the Weimar Republic, 1920s Germany. A time of hyperinflation, where a wheelbarrow of cash couldn't buy a loaf of bread. The social fabric was rotting. This is the level of orange energy, the energy of the gut, of decadence, of digestion, and of sloth. The German people were starving, humiliated, and desperate. The high ideals of the philosophers were gone. The survival instinct of the warrior was frustrated. What was left was a craving for comfort, a craving for escape. Berlin became the capital of vice.
But look closer at the nightclubs. Look past the cabaret dancers and the jazz bands. The fascination with the occult exploded. Seances were as common as dinner parties. Why? Because when the physical world makes no sense, when money loses its value overnight, people turn to the non-physical. They grasp for control. Hans Heinz Ewers becomes our guide through this twilight. Ewers was a writer, a dandy, a man who walked the line between the libertine black energy and the nationalist red. He wrote Alraune, a novel about a woman created through artificial insemination using the semen of a hanged man and a prostitute. A grotesque perversion of the sexual magic theories. It was a sensation. Ewers was tapping into the subconscious horror of the nation. Ewers and many like him thought they could ride the tiger. They saw the rise of the National Socialists, the Nazis, and they thought, here it is, the return of the pagan vitality, the return of the body. They mistook the Nazi movement for a sexual liberation, a breaking of the chains. They saw the leather, the torches, the physical perfection of the youth movements, and they thought it was the black energy returning. They were catastrophically wrong. The Nazis were not interested in the pure black energy of sex, and they certainly weren't interested in the chaotic, individualistic freedom of the magician. They were masters of the red energy, fear and war, and they coded it in the orange energy of mass appeal and base emotion. The result wasn't the clean black of the void, it was a dirty, muddy brown. There is a moment of realization that is terrifying to contemplate. Imagine Ewers standing at a rally in the early 1930s. He sees the uniform ranks, he feels the thumping rhythm of the drums. He realizes that the magic he studied, the cultivation of the individual will, the mastery of the inner self, has been industrialized. The Nazis had taken the aesthetics of the occult, the runes, the rituals, the focus on the blood, and weaponized them to enslave the mind, not free it. The true Satanists of the pre-war era, the Bohemians who sought liberation through biology, were the first to be purged. The Nazis didn't want competition. You cannot have a population experimenting with personal power and sexual liberation when you need a population of obedient soldiers. The black energy, which requires deep personal introspection and confrontation with one's own fears, is the antithesis of fascism. So, the narrative was rewritten. The Nazis projected the Satanist label onto the Jews, the communists, and the Bohemians. They claimed to be purging the moral rot, while they themselves were engaging in the darkest ritual of all, the mass sacrifice of the battlefield and the concentration camp. They operated on the red level of death and the orange level of herd mentality, completely severing the connection to the black level of life force. The tragedy of pre-war Germany isn't that it was filled with evil wizards summoning the devil. The tragedy is that a generation of explorers discovered a powerful, natural current within the human body, a current of connection and creation, and they were crushed by a machinery of fear. When we look back at those grainy photos of 1920s Berlin, at the wild eyes of the poets and the dancers, we shouldn't see villains. We should see people who were desperately trying to feel something real in a world that was becoming increasingly artificial. They were working with the heavy, black clay of human existence, trying to sculpt a soul. It is a cautionary tale. When a society represses the natural, biological drive, the black energy, it doesn't disappear. It festers, it warps, and eventually it allows itself to be co-opted by the red energy of violence. The man who cannot master his own fear will eventually be mastered by a man who knows how to wield it. If you found yourself captivated by this look into the hidden history of the 20th century, pass this episode along to a friend who loves history from the shadows.